Yeah, I popped on early just to get some coffee. See, there's early risers here, or
it's very warm here, so I'm actually not really into coffee drinking now.
there's always iced coffee, I suppose.
Yeah, but I don't have one. Hey, John. Hey, Hank.
Morning, everybody.
Hey, Andrew, Casey.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Quick warning. I'm basically returning from my effective summer vacation, so I'm absolutely oblivious. I try to help as best as I can.
Thank you for joining. Okay. Well, I guess a few of the other folks will join in a minute or so. John, should we? Okay, good to see. If anyone knows more about the D-bomb group. Well, thanks to you, Dick, and Ole. I think we have some contacts established, so we will hopefully see them in a future conference call, and they will explain us on what they do.
It'd be pretty good. It'd be pretty good to find out if it if it got any traction. But it's very similar to much of what SCITT is. If it got any traction, and if so, or why not, and so forth, because it's very interesting that way. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I've met those guys before. I've been following D-bomb since it first got into Linux Foundation. So it would be good to get an update. There is a very significant difference between us, which may be bridgeable, may not be. Is that if you look at the diagram, the D-bomb structure, it looks really, really like ours. But in the detail, the need for each organization to host their node, and then this setting up of channels, is cryptographically and mechanically very different to the concept of having sovereign receipts. So
right.
It's an interesting one. I mean, if we can map their channels to our feeds or something like that, I think it would be really interesting. But I'm not sure that's the direction they were going in.
I'll give you all Mehdi's email.
Yeah, Mehdi's already replied, so he's happy to come and present. We just need to pick a. I think, especially as that's a sort of special guest and liaison thing, we have to be super careful with the reminder we got about organizing meetings in advance. So I think we need to have 2 weeks notice, so we could potentially, selfishly, I don't want to suggest this because I'll be on vacation in 2 weeks, but 2 Mondays from now, we could schedule him in. That'd be good. Or 3 Mondays now.
If you want to wait till you're back, I mean.
Yeah, I don't want to hold things up for the rest of the group, but I would quite like to see it. So.
Yeah, you should definitely schedule it when you also have time.
Right.
That would be good. And of course, like we did in the past, we talked to other groups as well. So anyone who works in that space is obviously welcome to share what they are doing. And apparently there are lots of projects in that same sphere. Anyway,
yeah, I'm kicking off a D-bomb project, but it's not like I'm no expert, and and they're about to release a version 2.
Okay, that's good to hear. Ray?
Yeah, well, I just didn't want to interrupt. I think what would be very useful, despite any differences that John mentioned, is above the API, like what kind of data are they submitting to their, their machine, and maybe we can do that before we get any, before we get someone to present it to us, because that's what I would find interesting is I would like to know more about the, like we have this one idea from Dick in terms of the vendor response file, something like that, like as many as we can find, how they decided that they're actually using it. That's what I think would be super delicious to see. Thank you.
Right. You actually, Ray, you wanted to work with Dick on this vendor response file or whatever you want to call it. Did you make some progress on that?
Well, only to the extent of just pulling in his information and trying to recognize what I'm trying to trying to blend what he seems to want to have and what other people tend to be saying that the SCITT machine actually is at this point. So I think we made a little bit of progress. I created just a document to try to pull in all the information, and I did an initial round there, and there were some submissions to the list, including the DBOM information, and then that I will put in there, and then any information we can get about the DBOM files that are similar to the VRF vendor response file, then that will provide more information, and if we can get as much as possible, then at a certain point it'll be ready to push over the cliff and resolve. I think like looking at, well, I better not go too far, but yeah, I think we're making some progress, and at some point either today or any other time I can just show you what I have if anybody hasn't read it. Thanks.
Cool. Hank.
So I'm aware of Chris's DBOM activity for quite some time now, and I find it very interesting how the direction changed a little bit. So now it's basically a pub sub service for the contributors to the information exposed, and that's fine. I understand how subscriptions work. I don't really understand why a publish is called a commit. Probably because they assume there's some verifiable data structure providing some append-only log beneath it. And it seems to me, as Trillian was highlighted, I think at some point, I don't know if it still is, as an example, that SCITT could be the DBOM could be a vehicle for using a SCITT transparency service, for example. So for me, it seems these are orthogonal concepts. And that might be interesting to explore, but that might also delve into hackathon and testing run. So yeah, I agree with John that we have to make some timely invitations, so do we have a critical mass and audience size, and go from
there. Thanks, Hank. So you, I note in the meeting minutes that you support inviting the group. Okay, but we should jump to our agenda. John, I believe we said that we would be looking at the issue tracker and see where we are. Is that fine?
Yeah, we need to look at the issue tracker, and we definitely need to get some updates on the feed. In fact, I'm going to reorder in the minutes. Put the feed second, so that we actually do that this time because we didn't get to it at all.
Did you? Okay. Well, I have filed a few issues in the GitHub, so maybe I can briefly glance over them and see whether there's some immediate reaction. I posted it to the mailing list as well, but didn't got any feedback. So as I was reading through the architecture document, I noticed a few inconsistencies, and I would like to highlight a few of those. For example, issue, I copy that into the chat window. Give me a second. So this is one issue. So this is the aspect of the terms that are used throughout the document. So there's the term auditor, consumer, and verifier used, and I think it would be good to combine them because they at the level of the protocol, they mean the same thing, in my opinion. Maybe I'm oversimplifying, but it gets tricky. The document gets tricky to read if sometimes sort of one term is used and then sometimes another one, and they are not so well defined. So in essence, there are some entities that query the log and do something with that information, and that could be in some cases could be an auditor, or it could be a consumer. Of course, they care about different aspects, and that can be discussed in the document. But it would be just easier to read the document. So that was one. There was another one. I copy that. That's the issue of harmonizing the terms issuer and client. I'll post that link in the chat window too. There, the issue is the issuer is the one that creates the signed statement, and then the client term is used to actually refer to the protocol that sends the signed statement over to the transparency service. However, it's not, there's no specific requirements imposed on the actual transport per se. Like, of course, there's the API and so on. So maybe the client would be a term that could be used in the API document, client and server, while the architecture talk speaks about an issuer. Or otherwise distinguish them in a convenient way. And then the last one I want to bring up was the issue of signed statement versus the envelope. Another copy that one into the chat window too. So the document is a little bit, maybe that's a leftover from an earlier version of the document. The text talks about an envelope sort of wrapping, sort of as a reference to the whole structure that includes the signed statement, but it's, I think, only a technical artifact, or maybe a leftover from earlier days of the documents. But ultimately, what the signed statement is just a cozy sign one, and that gets sent. And so talking about the envelope there is just confusing. It's another term that just appears in the text, and you just wonder where it comes from. And if you, and I had difficulties, sort of like, I don't want to go ahead and proactively sort of rip out terms and merge terms and go through the whole document to replace them if I don't get any feedback on any of the issues that I just mentioned, because they have some effects throughout the document if you replace a term with another one. Independently from the issues above, I tried to clean up one section, and I sent starting a pull request on section 6. It's not finished yet, but Yogesh already gave me a little bit of feedback. So there's this, so from an implementation point of view, there is the need, obviously, for the issuer to create these signed statements and then to issue and send them to the transparency service, and that's perfectly fine. So there's some text I cleaned up, did some wording changes, nothing dramatic, maybe editorial cleanup. But then, and actually you can see that if you look through the CDL text in there it talks again about the envelope that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And it also, in my opinion, it tried to collapse the concepts like the sign statement and the response from the transparency service, which includes the receipt as well in the transparent statement. So, and that was a little, I think that could be separated out a little bit clearer by just saying like the first step is issuer creates this signed statement. Here's the structure, how it looks like. And then again, the transparency service does some processing and then it sends a response back. And here's how the response looks like. And I think what is done today is in the document that has been submitted is to collapse the two, which I think makes it more difficult to read. But maybe this is just in my opinion. So in that sense, I would appreciate your feedback on this too. Specifically, if you read through it, think about how someone would want to implement this in terms of step-by-step. So that's what I was trying to do here, like trying to create this, make the steps a little bit easier to read, at least from my point of view. Okay, Dick. Sorry if I didn't realize that you're in the queue. Good.
That's quite all right, Hannes. No problem. Thank you. Dick Brooks, REA. So first thing I want to say is that I think the first issue you raise is one that is being discussed now, and it's been an issue within the software supply chain for a long time, and that's the ambiguity of roles. You mentioned a few of them there, but there are others that also create similar ambiguities. The U.S. CISA group that's working on a document called it's the ICT Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force is actually working on some definitions for these various supply chain roles. And they're not ready to produce or publish that information yet. We're waiting to get some feedback from the state procurement officers and some more federal inputs before we go forward with, providing a public view of what those defined roles are. And this is an area that, as you know, is going to have perhaps as much discussion as the whole software identity discussion. So that's coming. And I'll let the group know as soon as I can when those role definitions are available for review. It may be useful for this. Secondly, I want to say thank you to Cassie Crosley for joining this effort. Cassie is a longtime SBOM contributor, so to have her in this work group is going to be beneficial to helping us work those software supply chain issues. And thirdly, I'd like to say, Ray, you did a great job at getting us started on the API topic. It's an area that is fundamental to the purpose of SCITT. And so I think we do need to spend a bit more time making sure that that API is defined and is serving the purpose that we want it to serve within the SCITT architecture and ecosystem. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dick. Yeah, we are definitely, or at least speaking for myself only, interested in looking at the terminology. As you pointed out, I struggled with that a little bit as well. It would be good to harmonize it with what other people do and basically create the link so we don't have to do everything ourselves. Also thanks to Casey for joining. That's excellent. If you, Casey, have some feedback on the document, it will definitely help us to make it easier to read for different communities. So we're always looking for someone who looks at it with fresh eyes. Obviously, there are a couple of people on the call who have been very deep into the trenches, so they probably don't even notice any issues anymore because they have been working on it for so long. So that would be very helpful for us. John, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so on that, I mean, clearly everybody reviewing and certainly fresh eyes reviewing is great. To that end, I've got a new person from my engineering team looking at the spec, seeing if we can implement from first principles. You'll remember we managed it last time, but that was a very sort of low level, deep implementation. So we are doing that, and I'll update with anything else that comes along. One thing that's really sticky that I've noticed, and I think Ori's not here today, so he probably has the strongest opinions. Henk might also have some. Your suggestion of harmonizing client with issuer is a bit tricky, but not because of your suggestion, but because we use issuer in a slightly odd way, I would suggest, in places where people who are used to PKI type systems will not be very whatever, it won't resonate with them, I would suggest. So there is potentially a very big change to make there if we want to be harmonized with those communities. Otherwise, yeah, we need to be much clearer. I think there's a job for the SCITT.io site to maybe have a much higher resolution, cleaner diagram than we're able to do in RFC text ASCII art, because it is that's a really tricky one.
John, I think it would be like, for me, it would be useful feedback to say, like, I scribbled down notes on literally on paper of the SCITT architecture document, and I was thinking, like, how would I propose some changes? But I don't really know which direction the group wanted to go. One way is to say we get rid of the term client in the SCITT architecture document, and that would be one way. But then, as you said, it sounded like you are suggesting to come up with a completely different term for issuer and for client, and then have this new term represent both of it. Another possibility is to leave the two terms in there, but then better describe on what exactly is the requirement for the client and what is actually asked for the issuer to do. I don't care, actually, as long as there's right now it's not well defined. That's why I spotted it. Vic, do you want to say something about that?
Well, actually, very briefly, Hannes, I'm going back to something I said earlier. I was a little late, so I don't know if Cassie had a chance to introduce herself to the group, but she works at Schneider Electric, and she has a significant contribution to make. Have you had an opportunity to let Cassie introduce herself?
No, unfortunately not. That's a good idea. Yeah, Casey, I hope we don't put you on the spot here, but
No, it's fine. Can you hear me?
oh, excellent.
Yeah, I've been on and off the meetings for a long time. I had an overlap that I could never get resolved. Yeah, so I work for Schneider Electric. I have been a product security officer and leading all the global governance topics, and specifically the SBOM topic. And then, so I was on the calls originally. I would just listen in before you even became the official group, back when you were working on the first versions of the documents. And so my responsibility is supply chain security. So I'm vice president over a ton of initiatives that other people are doing the details of, but I do have the SBOM team reporting directly to me, and I'm working very closely with different customers and with governments on product transparency in regards to their needs, but also trying to make it realistic. And one of the items that I've been involved with and just on the periphery along with this one is the DBOM. So I've got SBOMs in, I've got thousands of SBOMs for our products collected and stored, and have been sharing them under NDA to customers. But we have not, up to this point, I have not worried about signing them or doing the more detailed layers of trust and transparency. And that's the topic I'm working on now, a lot around provenance and such. So this has been the next stage, is getting to that layer. And that's why I wanted to be able to look at fully implementing, things like DBOM and SCITT and see where that takes us, from an actual usage. And so going to be piloting different pieces to get it working. So thanks, Dick. So
yeah, thanks a lot. I try typically not to ask anyone to specifically introduce themselves, because some people just want to hang around and don't want to be sort of like pointed at. But thanks a lot. It's really great to have you here. Specifically, like Schneider Electric is obviously a well-known company with use cases that we probably should look at our next hackathon. At the last hackathon, I don't know if you've seen that. We have looked at based on a proposal from Dick, at the FDA sort of medical device use case, and that was very useful for us. And we always trying to figure out like what areas should we look at next to make the whole thing as realistic as possible and as practical as possible.
okay. No, I didn't look at the hackathon. I think I had conflicts and of course couldn't attend in person.
No problem. Dick.
Yeah, I just want to say, Cassie, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but you've been such an influential participant in the software supply chain work effort that I thought it would be worthwhile just, giving you an opportunity to let the work group know what you're bringing to the party. You're a very valuable contributor, and I think it's going to be very helpful having you as part of this effort. So thanks for joining us, and thank you for the opportunity, Hans. Thanks.
Thank you. And no problem. You can call me out anytime.
Thanks a lot.
Right, just I don't know, Cassie, if you're familiar yet with sort of HedgeDoc and our minutes and things. But if you click on the little sort of pencil mark in the middle of your icons on the top right, you'll see the note-taking tool. I took some notes of your intro, so if there's anything in there that is inaccurate or you don't want published, feel free to just delete it again. Just letting you know that's there.
Okay, great. No, I had never clicked that icon. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to accidentally embarrass anybody. I think it's right, but want to be careful. And the other thing is there are videos from the hackathon. So if you had sort of half an hour to spend, I can send you the time codes for the YouTube videos for you to see what we did with the medical device use case, and then that might accelerate some of the learning if you're interested in that.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Great, we'll do that.
Yeah. So, Yogesh.
Yeah, I was Hannes. You raised the point of client versus issuer, right? I just joined late, trying to set the context here.
Yeah, I walked briefly through the issues I filed, and I was in the hope that some of you then look at it and state your opinions, and then we kind of figure out how to resolve them.
So are you sharing your screen to exactly what issue you are referring here, or you want
no, I posted the links to the chat window because they are just GitHub issues. I can send the link again.
No, I got it. Yeah, okay. I just
yeah. I didn't put a lot of text in there because the problem is not so much the text that is in there. It's actually the text that is not in there. So it's a little bit it's tricky to sort of to share something specifically. And I think I'm just missing text in the document on nailing down exactly what's really relevant to the protocol and to the architecture and what we are working on, besides like, for example, now since we decided that we take the API, the REST API, and move that into a separate document, the client terminology to me is kind of an API artifact.
Yes, I mean, I was thinking about it. So the issuer is something different than a client, actually, if you see that. Issuer is the one who issues the statement about the artifact.
Right.
Which is, I'm producing this software, or I'm vouching for this software to be, that's the issuer's role. And the client is who is authorized to interact with the SCITT with a given role, basically. So he can be different entity than as issuer of the statement, who is responsible for the claims made within the statement. So
yeah,
they can be one in certain scenarios, but may not be necessarily one in all the scenarios.
right.
One entity.
But then
Yeah.
if you sort of like make the client as, like you said, like is someone who is authorized to contact the transparency service and register something, then the question arises on like, is there a need to, like, what's the authentication and authorization machinery to deal with the client authentication? Because we have a story for authenticating and authorizing the issuer, but not for the client. So that's missing in the document. And also whether there's any relationship between the issuer and the client, and whether that needs to be indicated somewhere. Like, do we require the transparency service to, let's say, to understand that certain issuers or signed statements by issuers come from certain clients only? Is that a thing or not?
Yeah, we
So I
need
think
to better clarify that. I agree with you. There's
right,
some
and
work need to be
that's
done.
what I'm missing. And maybe, yeah. So this is, to me, a little bit the issue. There's a kind of a black hole there.
Yeah, I think we need to work on that. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm happy to contribute some text if I know what the answer is. Like, it's easier to write something. I would have naively said that there's no specific client authentication. The client, the REST API, is kind of a transport, and that's it. But maybe the story is more complex, and I don't know how some of you solve that.
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
I see
authorization list. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
no, I see the queue is filling, so presumably we have the answers in a few minutes.
Yeah, I will let others go. I will just lower down the hand. Yeah.
Dick.
Thanks again, Hannes. I don't feel like I'm dominating this, but I just did want to bring one more item to the surface. So Roman sent an email to the list asking questions about something that Ray had sent about the new SEC regulations that go into effect December 2023. And he asked, how does this have any relationship with the work we're doing? And I will just go on the record and say, I think, in my personal opinion, this is the biggest change in the software supply chain regulatory space in the U.S. And I even include the SBOM work. This is even bigger than that. This goes well beyond what the SBOM work did in NTI minimums. And of course, the question will be, what role will SCITT play in this, in helping to implement or satisfy these SEC regulations? I will say I don't have an answer to that question at the moment, but I think there is certainly a potential for the SCITT Trust Registry to serve some role in ensuring that the information these companies present is in fact trustworthy. So I see a potential there if anyone's interested in discussing. I will say this whole SEC thing is creating a huge flurry here in the U.S. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. Yeah, I saw that email exchange and Roman's question about the relationship. And of course, all this stuff is just sort of developing in front of our eyes. So, it's work in progress. So we will see what comes out of it at the end and what the implications are. So yeah, but thanks for bringing this up, Dick. It's always good to know about these regulatory developments or in general industry trends. John.
Yeah, sorry, I want to go backwards for a minute. So yeah, thanks, Dick. Yeah, there's often sensitivity about SCITT straying outside of its lane, as we've heard a couple of times, but I can't see any way that this is that. This is straight solidly down the software supply chain, software artifacts thing. In any case, yeah, so on the issuer versus client thing, it is, clearly there's work to be done. We deliberately, I say we, I mean, I don't do much of the spec writing, I just implement it to make sure it works. But we as a community deliberately went very vague on the access controls at the scrappy layer. So the difference here that we need to drive back towards is one that says we have a kind of API access, which allows access controls. And there used to be a whole section, if people remember, saying things like RBAC, but RBAC was definitely wrong. And then we started saying things like certificates, but certificates was also definitely wrong because you can do OODC and things like that. So we don't want to be prescriptive on it, but nonetheless, there does need to be an application layer. You know, am I allowed to call this API type access control? And that's what the client is doing. And then the issuer is the issuer of the statement itself, the signer indeed of the statement itself, which is a different authority and a different identity. So I think the difference between the two is very clear and is extremely important to tell the difference between proof of possession of a signing key for making statements about a feed and proof of integration with an application that's allowed to make network calls. But probably we just took too much out when we were simplifying the authentication, the REST authentication stuff. So we should look at adding that as an issue to Scrappy.
I like that idea, John. If we could take the client concept, like just on a very high level, mention it in the architecture document, but then deal with the details of it in the REST API document, I think that would make life easier, because otherwise it's kind of a little bit of struggle from a, like, we also have to think about the readers. It's not, of course, there would be people who are involved in a group and know what this is about, and then they implement and so on, but there are also other readers who don't want to go into looking at the code and so on. They just want to read the document and understand what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. If someone like you can't read it top to bottom and understand it, then it's wrong. So we'll fix that. But yeah, I think getting client into Scrappy and issuer in architecture is the right split.
I also see Neil saying that it would be useful to distinguish auditors and monitors. And that's a good question. So to me, like the reading through the document, it's like you have some parties that basically take what is stored in the log and then do all sorts of processing on that data. And of course, some need to download everything and then construct everything. Others have maybe are more interested in a very specific response only. And so I think it's good to indicate that there may be multiple different interests for those parties to get the data and do something with it. But from a writing point of view, it's difficult to mix and match the terms all over the place, because sometimes I'm wondering, like, if it says auditor, is that really, does it have to be the auditor, or can it be like a consumer who is only interested to a subset of it? Or is it a verifier who is sort of like, is the verifier the generic version of the consumer and the auditor or the monitor? And so yeah, I'm sometimes lost reading through it. I hope that makes sense. Neil, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've been trying to catch up with this in real time and missing some of the rest of the meeting, but it just seems to me that there might be some things important for the architecture or for the API, maybe more likely, that would distinguish kind of those use cases. I don't know if it's a use case, but somehow I think the architecture document should at least be talking, if it doesn't already, and maybe it does, about how kind of the ecosystem gains trust in any particular transparency log, and that's presumably via things like auditors and monitors, and defining architecturally the notion that everything has to be coherent enough to be audited and monitored, and also be useful for, again, what I call a relying party that is just interested in a particular claim.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Yogesh. Yogesh?
Sorry, I was mute. So I kind of agree with what Neil said, and I'm not sure whether we have covered adequately the various roles we have in the document, but we clearly need to have that kind of a whatever we think are the right roles in our flow from the end user perspective. Either we just hold everything in end user, or maybe we should have a very clear roles. What is the role of a verifier? What is the role of an auditor? And what is just role of a monitor? And then we should have a clear definition of these in the document. I think so far we have just followed the use of the term end user or consumer, which is kind of can encapsulate all these folded together as one big role. So my personal take, we should try to isolate these role rather than a single big gigantic role of end user or consumer.
Yeah, I wonder who is going to write that text that you and Neil just had brought up. I think it would be obviously useful to distinguish this a little bit better and to sort of make it clear on what the properties are, the security properties that the consumers or whatever relying parties get out of this. And I think it's also in line what Dick has been asking for a number of times. But I think we need some text. Text is not there.
I just, at least in terms of capturing the issue, I just commented on number 89.
Okay.
But yeah, that's exactly the right question, Hannes.
Yeah, it's just the work that needs to be done. Okay.
Yeah, I can think of adding it along with working with Neil and others in the community to help write that. Yes,
that would be fantastic. Thank you. Hank, you're next in the queue.
Yeah, just highlighting role definition. So coming back to the topic and the architecture, of course, there's this, as Yogesh highlighted, these buckets that are a consumer producer, and now we don't have to overspecify here, right? So the use cases can motivate some of these roles, buckets. If we need a more detailed one, like auditors versus monitor, I think that's helpful if there is enough meat to the bones here in the use cases. So there are, I think, tons of relying parties types that all behave the same time, the same manner in the end. And so we have to be careful just not to overload term glossary here, just because you might not be able to differentiate a auditor from a monitor technically, right? They might have different intents, and they might have different semantics what they use the output of a transparency service for example, but in the end they might do the exact same thing. So then the question arises, do we have to differentiate them, or is this just use case addition?
Thank you, Hank. Ray.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think that this idea of the different roles, I kind of agree with everybody here, but it's at a little bit different, higher level in my view. Like I'm trying to sort of move up those much higher level concepts up to the higher level API, if you will. So in the paper that I did make some comments in the notes here and put the link into the headstock notes. And in terms of the roughly the idea is that there's a lower level API, which is the one pretty much that's been defined. And then we're going to need a different higher level API, which would handle these higher level concepts, such as a different role. So the lower level API, just talking into this cryptographic log, is not going to care who's working with it, most likely. But I still think there's some additional, not so much regarding the roles, but some additional capabilities of that API. When I've been working with other APIs or other interfaces to machines like this, they usually have a way to understand what the capabilities are of the machine, to inquire about what is the profile or what are the capability profile of the machine, and if we have that kind of thing. So for example, in the old days, like working with modems and stuff, you would have an interface to it and you could say like can you do this? What are your capabilities? I can do these baud rates, all this, and having that API, like if you said, well, I want to talk to the SCITT instance here, there should be a way to first ask it, what can you do, and what is the manner in which I'm going to work with you, and then it may say, like we may only have one right now. This is exactly the only way that I work, is the way that's defined by the SCITT document, but there may be enhancements and so forth, or market differentiation by different folks that they want to do. And so those would be added in there. But then at this higher level, the concept is that the level of roles and actually requiring certain documents, or it seems to me like we're probably going to be needing to handle the identity, like in the DBOM thing, they have an identity block that they just sort of said accomplish it some other way. I think that can be accomplished also with SCITT, the same log. So maybe that's a good way to handle it, is to push the roles up out of this lower level API. You can talk about it, but I don't think it belongs at the low level for this, the way it's defined so far, for this low level machine that's defined so far, to know anything about roles. Okay, thank you.
My system is misbehaving. Can I still be heard?
Yep.
Oh, thanks. Sorry. Just to say that, at least from an API perspective, I can just imagine that there might be a different low level, important to have it at the low level capability to be downloading stuff in bulk efficiently versus kind of a more targeted relying party. And I appreciate all the efforts to. It's hugely important that we make this usable for real people, for real problems, so that they adopt it. But as people keep pointing out, that implies so many different things for so many different specific use cases. It's going to be a real challenge. So I still think it's useful to at least address the question and maybe answer the question in the architecture document. Are we addressing both systematically the need to have an ecosystem where we trust particular logs and somebody's actually watching them to see if they misbehave, as a completely different overall need than the ability for individual relying parties to kind of look at particular corners of the logs.
Thanks, Neil. John, you are next in queue.
Yeah, two comments on that. So one is the eternal comment on the charter, and we're having very use case specific stuff or whatever. I think we've many times said that we want to stay payload agnostic or payload blind, which prevents sort of degrees of semantic search and things like that. But it is absolutely possible to define grammars for making queries that transit the SCITT layer. And I think that's important. So I think we demonstrated some of that at the hackathon, and certainly happy to keep pushing that forward. So saying we faithfully are able to make those queries without knowing what they mean, I think is potentially a thing to go for. But yeah, as Neil says, getting too specific or actually understanding what these questions are asking would be a significant expansion of the work product. However, there is some stuff in the Digital Twin Consortium. So for those who don't know, I spent a couple of years running the security working group at Digital Twin Consortium just prior to SCITT starting up. And within there in the open group in the IIC, we developed some models based on connection profiles for digital twins and particularly industrial and IoT firmware security use cases. So if we're interested in that kind of capabilities thing without straying outside our lanes or reinventing the wheel, I'd be happy to dig out the IIC documents for connection profiles and see if that is something that would help get deployment and traction.
Thanks, John.
I have one comment. I have heard both sides of the views, especially from Neil and what I was proposing, and for Ray and Hank, what also makes sense. What I think we can do to kind of satisfy both the groups is we leave it to the high level, what is there in the document as an end user, and we can clarify that it could be any of these terms like verifier, auditor, or there may be more like monitor. And over the period of time, we need to develop a guidance document associated to the main architecture spec, which helps implementers use the SCITT architecture to make solutions or build solutions on top of that. And there we can expand the end user role into much more concrete, exemplify that into much more concrete instantiation of monitor, verifier, so that there is a scope for modifying n number of further roles if required be based on a particular implementation instance. So the guidance document can help clarify what the end users are, and we can live with the main architecture spec with just a common blob of end user. That's what I think would be a best, that's my view, best compromise can happen.
Yeah, so this is saying just barging in, sorry for ignoring Q, but my name was Atal. And so, yeah, I think exactly that. So we have the architecture document to define all the building blocks. We have the use cases in there. We have the Scrappy document that will tell you how to technically facilitate that. And then the guidance document. The guidance document will pick up on use cases and maybe on the terminology of roles, as discussed before, as you just highlighted, for example, auditor versus monitor, and then go into the depths of how do I self-identify with the solution, or how do I make use of this in a way that is useful to me, combining potential API and append-only verifiable structure thing, or just the receipt item for my scenario and such. So the guidance document, I think, is the thing we have to take into a hand like a pamphlet and then walk around with, for people to, do you self-identify with this? No, why not? What can we do to help you make use of this? And I think that's the real helpful guidance in the end, the informative documents that accompany the standards text. And I would absolutely agree with that.
Thanks again. I'm sorry I can't see if what the queue is doing, but this is Neil, and
No, you're next. It's good.
I just hope that there's something in the architecture document that distinguishes the need for complete auditing of an entire log via an auditor or monitor or whatever from, you know, based on that consistency. I won't call it a guarantee, because if nobody's watching a log, I think we need to acknowledge, I think, that if nobody's watching a log, then it could, you know, not be append only and muck with things and not be trustable. And somebody in the ecosystem needs to be watching that. So I would just advise kind of any user of a log that we need that kind of a role. And I like the idea of the guidance document.
Thank you, Neil. Ray.
Yeah, I think there is a big difference there between that particular role, and is at the low level API would need to have probably that information exposed, like I say, in that some sort of a request about the profile of whatever the SCITT machine at that level can do, and say perhaps here's how you can review what's in the log and validate it. Or maybe there's other ways of doing it, of saying that isn't how we do it. We have a I guess a digital twin. I'm not sure I quite understand that yet, but maybe there's two of them or something, and they check each other, or some manner in which that they maybe there's an embedded checker that checks it, some way that it is, or maybe it's not checked. Maybe they just say, look, that's our policy. We don't really check things. We just put it in this, and we think that's a pretty good solution. And if you don't mind that level of security, then go ahead and use it. So I mean, it wouldn't necessarily need to have the same thing, but that's different from the user level, whether you're a submitter or a viewer. Maybe somebody needs to search for things, which would be at that higher level API. Okay, enough said for me. Thank you. I do support the guidance document, of putting those things perhaps in the guidance document, but still at this lower level I think the API should have that sort of utility interface so that you can find out what it can do. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Steve.
A couple of times where we talk about APIs and so forth, and obviously we'll have a set of APIs, and I've been thinking about this. Is there a way to describe it as APIs and policies for implementation? Like, for instance, we talk about, as an industry, we talk about things like PCI compliance. So it describes how someone must implement a set of standards to meet a certain set of expectations. So just something to round out the both. Here's the APIs, but just because you implement that API does not mean you're necessarily meeting the expectations. So whether that's an audit, whether that's implementing a certain set of standards that can be auditable, I just think it's interesting to balance them both.
Thanks, Steve. We're getting close again to the full hour. We always said that we would be coming up with an agenda for the next week's meeting. John, I we again didn't manage to talk about the fleet structure, so I put that as an agenda item for next Monday on the top of the list, so that would make it better. And I think we should also talk about the Scrappy, the API. So those are definitely two topics that we should be looking into.
Yeah, for sure. And the feeds is kind of blocking Scrappy in a number of ways, so we do need to start giving that some love.
Okay, Okay. Any last comment? Oh, next Monday is a holiday in the UK. Okay. So I hope someone will join
I
nevertheless.
might not be here.
You won't be here, John?
I might be, I might not. It depends how
Okay.
fast my wife can drive.
Well, I can run the show. I expect the participation to be light otherwise, but I think we should still hold the meeting. Is that also a holiday in the US? Next Monday?
Next Monday, no, the following Monday.
Hope not, all right?
No, our holiday for Labor Day is the Monday after September 4th.
Okay, okay, that's good, because otherwise, like,
So,
then
so maybe on the Slack channel, Steve and Ori have been chatting about feed, at least Steve and Ori and Henk a bit, I'm sure. So maybe if Steve and Ori are both available, that would be perfect to do the feed stuff next time.
Yeah. And you're going to invite the DBOM guys, is that good? For not for next week, but
I already did, and I updated the agenda on Data Tracker for the week that I've invited them. So unless they say no, that's all done.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot. Good. Okay. Well, thank you all for the feedback today, and we talk to each other next Monday, if possible. And please have a look at the open issues. A few of you also have some action items. Please help us to make some progress.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.